This is Get Real with Deb Waterbury, a show where Dr. Deb gets real as she teaches through books and studies on topics relevant for today. And now, here is your host, Dr. Deb Waterbury.
Hello there. Welcome to week 2 of our 8-week study on the second book of the Painted Window trilogy, Threads. Again, the first book was called Painted Window. We've already done that one, an 8-part study. That's available at my website, debwaterbury.com, or you can always go to my YouTube channel at Deb Waterbury. And as soon as we finish the 8-part study here of Threads, we'll go on to book 3, which is White Zephyr. So Threads, again, continues the story of Elizabeth. And like we talked about last week, this book really does deal with our struggles while we're here and Jesus has ascended. He's not here in the book. King Reginald has gone to war, so they're trying to figure out how to live in the village with all the trials and the temptations and the struggles from the evil forces in the village. How can they maintain the knowledge of who they are when the king's not there? How can they maintain his love for them and knowing the depth of the king's love for them when he's physically not there? And what we'll do is we're going to see our characters struggle much the way that we do. This is an allegory, and not only is the story itself, the whole trilogy is an allegory. Not only is the story itself allegorical, each of the characters and the struggles they go through are allegorical. So they all, again, an allegory is something that's fiction that represents a higher thought or a higher theme. So each of their lives are allegorical of struggles that we ourselves go through. So people often ask me, who are you thinking about when you write about Elizabeth or Mary or Millie or whoever? The only person in the trilogies who actually is just one person is Reginald. That's Jesus. But everybody else really just represents a different part of us. I struggle in the same ways that Elizabeth did, Millie did, Mary did, Contessa did, even the men, Terence, I struggle the same way all of them do. And we all do. So each of their struggles represents different kinds of struggles that we go through. And then how can we get through them and maintain the knowledge of who we are? So that's what our character's going through. So that's what we're going to study in these messages. Now, last week we started what I would kind of think of as a 2-part little thing on James. I'm going to do the second part today. We're talking about persevering through trials and persevering through the troubles and why we do that and to what end and how in the world, as James says in James 1 chapter verse 2, where he says to count it all joy or consider your trials as joy. How can we do that? And as we said last week, one of the first things that James tells us is to pray for wisdom and to pray for it in humility and have faith that God's going to give it because he will. We pray for the wisdom from God. So what I want to talk about and continue where we left off last week, I want to talk about what it looks like to ask for wisdom in humility. What does that look like? And we live in a society, we live in a state of being. I say society often, and I shouldn't. I should be saying a state of being, a state of humanity, where humility is difficult. You and I, by nature, are not humble. And please understand, being shy doesn't mean you're humble. It just means you think people are looking at you all the time, and that makes you not humble at all. But we are not by nature humble because we live in here with ourselves, right? I mean, I see everything through a Debbie lens. Everything that happens to me, I interpret through this lens of Debbie. How does it affect Debbie? It is almost impossible for me to step out from behind my Deb lens and see it from another person's perspective. I have to make myself do that. If I don't make myself do that, I will naturally by nature filter through this. So because of that, it's very difficult for you and I to be humble because we are by nature going to think about self first. And so James says that when we're asking for wisdom again that helps us in this world that is not our home. When we ask for that wisdom, he says we must do so in humility. So I want to start today. Again, we're in James chapter 1. I'll be reading from the English Standard Version. You can read from any version you want to, or you can just listen, either one. James chapter 1, I'm only looking right now at verses 9 through 11. So let's look at those verses together. He says, "Let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation, and the rich in his humiliation, because like a flower of the grass, he will pass away. For the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the grass. Its flower falls and its beauty perishes. So also will the rich man fade away in the midst of his pursuit. And then if you'll notice, just to move on just for a second, verse 12 now goes back to a person who is talking about trials. So I want to set a little bit straight here at first. These verses are often like taken just by themselves and thinking that James is teaching here about how to behave if you have a lot of money or you don't have a lot of money. How to behave within wealth. Well, when you really think about that, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that James be talking about, humility and wisdom, and then just all of a sudden intersect a few verses about wealth, because that wouldn't make sense at all. So it has to instead point to what has he been talking about. And he's talking about asking for wisdom and humility. So if we take those 3 verses and understand the context of this entire passage is about humility, then what is he saying about the rich and the poor in terms of humility? And the thing is, think about it. If you're very, very poor, then you're always thinking about how you can get more. If you're very, very rich and that becomes your whole focus is you. How can I get more? Why don't I have more? That's the focus. If you're rich or you have a lot of money, you tend to be very self-sufficient. I don't need anything. I don't need anybody else. And the common denominator pronoun you use there all along is I, me, my, everything about me. There's no humility either for the rich or the poor if they're looking at what they have or don't have and being at the center of that existence. And so James just takes a second here to go, I'm talking to all of you. That in the midst of where, even in your wealth or your lack therein, you have to be humble and don't put yourself at the center if you truly want to understand how it is to get through trials and persevere through them so that you can then consider the joy that's on the other side. Remembering that, knowing that you can't know what it is, and the humility to come before the Lord, recognizing you're not going to know. Deuteronomy 29:29, one of my very favorite verses, it says, the secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things that are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that way we may do all the works of the law. Asking for wisdom and humility recognizes that you may not get to understand everything. I was using this analogy the other day, and I've preached about it from the pulpit. We will spin our wheels and spend our time getting angry at God or angry at situation or trying to figure out why this is happening. This doesn't seem right to me. And how often do we look at the world and we've heard people say, I don't believe that in God because how could a loving God allow so-and-so? How can a God who is kind allow so-and-so? And so we will spend in the middle, how could a God who loves me let this happen to me? So let me just talk to you a second about what you and I are trying to do in the middle of that. I want you to have a picture of Mount Everest, like just, huge mountain. And there's this tiny little ant that's right at right in the center of Mount Everest on the ground. Now that ant cannot see where Mount Everest begins nor ends, cannot see the top. He can only see that teensy little place in front of him that looks like some dirt. Now, what this ant says is, I don't like this thing here. I'm going to try to get rid of it. I'm gonna kick against it. So the little tiny ant arm starts pecking away at Mount Everest. Now, what Mount Everest is sitting there going, what in the world? Because this ant has no idea how big Mount Everest is. It can't see the beginning, the end, the top, the bottom. No idea. He sees that tiny little place that he's looking at. That is how you and I are behaving when we look at God and say, why? Why do you do this? How could you do this? You are just like that ant. You and I see this blip in time that might be 75, 80 years, and then we see only our circumstances, our periphery. We do not see globally. We don't see in terms of time. We see the smallest little segment, and we then think we can look and determine what is good, what is loving, what is right. Understanding that asking for God's wisdom and humility recognizes I am the ant at the base of Mount Everest. And I'm asking you, Father, in my limited ability to understand, show me what you need me to see. And then I'll be happy with whatever it is you show me, because I'm going to consider it joy, knowing that you're Mount Everest. I can't see where you start, where you end, where you begin. I don't know where you are in that. You're too big. You're God, but I trust you. Tell me what to do in my small periphery of existence. That's full humility. And James says this is how we need to come and beseech the Lord. It really is unless you can come to that, you're going to just be mad all the time. Every time something bad happens, you're going to be mad at God and not recognizing that it may look bad to you, but that doesn't mean it's bad. It might feel wrong to you. Doesn't mean it's wrong. It might not feel good to you. That doesn't mean it's not good. You are the ant that cannot see where this begins and ends, and yet he can. So understand too that our trials and temptations have to, and this is where James goes on in the next verses, we have to go and look at these trials and temptations in the way that we should as a humble believer coming before the throne of grace. So let's look at verses 12 through 15 of chapter 1. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial. For when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life which God has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I'm being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. So note again, James is saying asking for wisdom is understanding how to discern between trials and temptations. And we have to, you have to have godly wisdom to do that. And he doesn't say, I want to set something straight here. He doesn't say, if you do this, you will get the crown of life. He says, when you do this, you will get the crown of life. So you're moving in wisdom throughout your life because you know you're God's, and the crown of life waits for you. It is given to you. It's not something that you earn there. But again, don't make all of this trials and temptation stuff about you. God can't be tempted, and that's what Paul can't be tempted, and he can't tempt you. He can test you, and he does test you, but he can't tempt you. And there's the difference between testings and temptings is that the testing happens out here. There's circumstances, there's stuff that comes at you. They are the trials and tribulations. When we take those things in, and then they become thought processes and they move through us, then they become temptations. A temptation, it's not about what you feel, it's about what you do with what you feel. When God allows testings or even prompts testings in our life, he is behaving as God, because he then, as James said, wants us to count it all joy, consider joy, because he's going to develop in us perseverance. And the only way that can happen is from this outward testing, these outward trials, and so that he can then have the opportunity to prove himself faithful. Now, when those testings hit and you and I take them inside of ourselves and begin to act on what we think in our heads, then they can become temptations to evil. God doesn't make them temptations, you do. He just brings the tests here. John Stevenson said this about that. He said, your actions are nothing more than belated statements of what you have been thinking. Let me say that again. Your actions are nothing more than belated statements of what you have been thinking. That is why your thought life is so important. Sin always starts on the inside and works its way out. We so often want to blame everybody for our sins, but when you blame somebody for your sins, you're blaming the testing. You're blaming the thing that happened on the outside. When you sin, it's because you took that thing in, you considered it, didn't take those thoughts captive, and any action, you can do nothing that did not start here. And it's just like John Stevenson said, everything you do started here. It's just it's only a belated reaction to what's been in your brain. So if what happened out here turns into a sin, brother, sister, that's all you, because it came from you. You can't blame anybody else, and you certainly can't blame God. Our thought life has to be the center of where we get this. That's why Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5, we destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. Paul again said in Colossians chapter 3, verse 2, set our minds on things that are above, not on things that are on the earth. Why do we do that? Because what we think has a tendency to become a temptation. We have to take our thoughts captive. And so which is exactly, again, what Paul's talking about in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. Now, he's not saying he causes the temptation. He tells you he gives you a way out of it, which is always in taking your thoughts captive as unto him. Again, we have to understand that we're the bride. And James is literally reminding us that we have to seek the wisdom that we need through all that. And this is what our characters are going through right now in Threads. As we get to the end of part 2, you're recognizing you're probably beginning to get a little frustrated with some of these characters, and it's easy sometimes to look at somebody else who's not dealing well with their trials and tribulations and go, what is wrong with you? And recognize that we do the exact same thing. We have a real hard time in our trials and tribulations with seeking God's wisdom in the middle of them. Instead, we tend to react, and then we have to backpedal and try to fix what we did when we reacted. Wouldn't it be great if, as we're in the middle of the trial and the temptation, as James says, consider the joy that is set before you, as Jesus did, and then instead ask for the wisdom of God to get through this trial and get through this temptation. We do not have a bridegroom that is uninvolved. We do not have a bridegroom that does not care about what's going on with us. He is our mediator. He's the lover of our souls. He is in heaven right now mediating for you and I to the Father. And he is going to return. He's coming back, brothers and sisters. That's what book 3 is about. Why Zephyr, the return of the King. He's coming. And in the meantime, he's not left us here to fend for ourselves. We have him, but there are things we must learn, things we must do so that we can become more Christ-like and then take our part in kingdom building. Amen. Let me end with this great quote I found by a woman named Anitha Randall. I just really liked it in terms of using trials. She said, "In this life, I may never see how God is using my trials." And that's hard to get to that. But think about poor Isaiah. That man got sawn in half. He didn't live past that, I'll tell you what. So he didn't get to see the fruition. And so she says, I might not ever get to see God, how he uses my trials. But one day I will be grateful for them. All I can do now is trust that he who made the lame walk and the blind to see, who died on a cross so I could spend eternity with him, is going to do the very best thing for me. It all comes down to trust. Will I trust my circumstances that constantly change, or will I trust the God who is unchanging? Amen, Vanitha. That is really good. And it is about trust. You can't really trust a God you don't know, and you've heard me say that many, many times on many, many shows. But it does come down to that. Do I trust that I'm an ant who cannot see where God begins and ends, and do I trust that he does? And so therefore I will trust my days to him, including my circumstances, and that I'll be able to consider the joy that's set before me as my Savior did, simply because I know God is good. It may not feel good, but he is good. He may not feel loving, but he is love. It may not feel kind, but he is kind. It may not even feel just, but he is just. And remember, the Bible doesn't say he necessarily God does good things, God does loving things, God does kind things, God does just things. It says God is good, God is love, God is kind, God is judge, he and just. It says he literally, that's his character. It's no matter the things that he does, because if we start interpreting everything we see him allow or do, we may interpret that as unkind or unloving. But we have to, instead of interpreting the things, we have to look at his character, and his character is love, and his character is kind, and his character is just. And so if you can look at that character and put your trust there, then circumstances don't sway you. Amen? So next week we're going to move on more into this, but I just pray this will help. It helps some of you. It helps me often to just get through whatever I got in front of me. And we all have stuff. So I pray for you that this will be an encouragement as you go through this week. You are a sojourner. You're on your way home, but we got stuff to do while we're here, don't we? God bless you. I'll see you next time. Thank you for joining me today on this episode of Get Real with Deb Waterbury. I hope you were blessed, and I hope you got some information that's going to help you get through your day. If you want any more information on any of my books or my articles or on any of my future speaking engagements, you can find all that information at debwaterbury.com. God bless you.